Hello, my name is Alyssa Meuwissen, and I'm a research associate at the Center for Early Education and Development here at the University of Minnesota. And today I'm going to talk to you about a research study we did with online reflective consultation groups with child welfare workers. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about what we did, who participated, the results we found, and the conclusions that we're drawing. This research study was done with SEED and also with the collaboration of the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare, also here at the University of Minnesota. We recruited 40 frontline child welfare workers from email lists. Some of the email lists were from the Center for Advanced Studies in Child Welfare, and we had some national lists as well. We were specifically targeting child welfare workers who had caseload supporting children in or at risk of out-of-home placement, so they were all directly serving children. And the people that we got to participate were primarily in Minnesota, about 80%, and then we had a few other states represented as well. And they served communities of varying sizes, so we had a good mix of urban, mid-sized, and rural communities. So every child welfare worker was assigned to one reflective consultation group, and each of these groups had 1 to 3 child welfare worker participants, and they were headed by one infant mental health endorsed reflective consultant, which we had 10 of for the project. And 62% of the people in the study had not previously received reflective supervision consultation. So that was the majority had no experience, and then the rest had had some experience in their work, potentially with their current supervisor, etc. So to go a little more into what we know about who participated, the demographics showed that we had a pretty racially homogeneous sample. Most people were white and non-Hispanic, and we had a very full range of age and experience in child welfare, although there were more people towards the lower end of the ranges who were younger and had less experience in child welfare. So what did we do? Every person was assigned to a group, and each reflective consultation group met with their reflective consultant about once a month for 6 months, and that varied a little bit depending on scheduling and rescheduling. So sessions were held on Zoom video calls so that people from all over geographic areas could all participate together. And participants attended an average of 5 sessions with a range of 2 to 7. So most people did attend most sessions, although there was definitely variation in how much people were able to participate. So our research study design compared 2 time points, kind of right at the beginning of these about 6 months and then at the very end. And so at those 2 time points, participants completed a set of online surveys after their very first session and after their very last session. And so we're able to see what changed from those 2 time points. And then additionally, researchers here at the U listened to those first and last sessions that a person attended, and we were able to code them. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So the surveys that were used, we had every person fill out 4 surveys, not counting the demographics. The first one was the Reflective Supervision Self-Efficacy Scale. And this scale was about how confident you were in participating in reflective consultation. So you rated 17 questions, such as, how confident are you that you can discuss your emotional responses regarding challenging experiences with children and families in the context of consultation? So it was sort of that, like, how able are you to show up, be open, talk about families, talk about children, talk about their perspectives. Those were the kind of questions that were being asked. And then the next survey was called the Reflective Supervision Rating Scale, and that was measuring participants' relationship with their reflective consultant and somewhat with their group. So an example of a question there was, my reflective consultant makes me feel nurtured, safe, and supported during consultation. So it was that kind of feeling supported, feeling like you had trust in your consultant. The third one was the Professional Quality of Life Scale, and for that survey, people rated 30 questions about their feelings, both positive and negative, about helping work. So it had a subscale of compassion satisfaction, which were those positive feelings, and then the second scale was the secondary traumatic stress and burnout, so feelings of stress and exhaustion. So an example would be, I feel worn out because of my work as a helper. And we were interested in these kinds of questions because burnout and turnover are really big issues in the child welfare field, and it's kind of a hypothesis that reflective consultation might be a really useful tool for those. So we wanted to measure that to see if we were getting any traction in that area. And then finally, only at post-test, we also directly asked people how helpful they felt their reflective consultation was, and they had a chance to explain kind of what worked well for them and what didn't. So we'll talk about that a little bit in the results. And then the last measure was that observation scale. So we actually recorded all of the calls, and then for the first and last session of every group, we got audio files and researchers listened to it. The measure that we use to code it is called the Reflective Interaction Observation Scale, called the RIOS. And this is a new measure that we're just starting to use in research. We've developed it here at the University of Minnesota, as well as in collaboration with a larger group called the Alliance for the Advancement of Infant Mental Health. And how this measure works is that we watch or listen to a reflective consultation session and think about what was talked about and how deep the reflection was in 5 different areas. So the first area is understanding the family story. So that is the relationships between the adults. It might be the mom and her husband. It might be the mom and her mom and kind of her upbringing. And so understanding those dynamics of like, what do these parents or these caregivers bring to the table? Or what are they going through right now, understanding their motivations for different situations that they might be in. The second topic is holding the child in mind. So really taking time to think about how is the child experiencing this? What are their feelings? What are their perceptions of the world? And in this study, the child could have been any age, from infants to teenagers. And so, but in any case, it was kind of taking that view of what is the child's perspective in all of this. The third area is professional use of self. And so that's how does the child welfare worker feel about this? What are their emotions? What is it bringing up for them? Are they feeling exhausted? Are they feeling energized? So being able to talk through that piece of what can I do and how is it affecting me as a person. And then reflective alliance talks about the relationship between the child welfare worker and the consultant, or in this case within the group. So how are the people working together? Are they showing those trust? Are they able to be vulnerable and open with each other? And then finally, parallel process is direct discussion of how different relationships affect other relationships. And so it might be within the family that how the grandma parents the mom is affecting how that mom is now currently parenting her child, or it could be more of this professional that the supervision you get is affecting how you are able to interact with your clients, being parents or children. And so really going through and kind of naming how these relationships chain together and why that's important. So those are the 5 aspects that the RIOS measures. So now that you know a little bit about the tools we used, we can go into what did we learn? What did we find from this study? So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the RIOS tool itself. So as I said, this is a new measure. And so one of the reasons we did this study was to learn about our RIOS tool. And this was a great way to do so. And we were able to find out that the RIOS was a useful tool in this situation. And an interesting thing that happened was we were able to look at the tool itself and found that how much you talked about the family's perspective and the baby's perspective were actually highly related. If you did a lot of one, you were likely to do a lot of the other. And so we were able to combine that into an overall scale about taking other people's perspectives. And similarly, if you scored highly on professional use of self, so you were able to be open about yourself and talk about your own feelings, you were also more likely to score highly on reflective alliance, that kind of measurement of the group's trust with each other. And so we collapsed the RIOS into 3 overall scales: others' perspectives, self-openness, and then parallel process stood alone. And this tool measured the entire group as a whole. We were not assigning ratings to any individual person. So these were group scores, which in some ways is really powerful, and in some ways is limiting just because surveys are individual tools and this was a group tool. So we're certainly have a lot more to learn about the RIOS on how it worked. But the kind of really exciting part about this was that we were able to show that if you showed a lot of change in that self-openness piece, so that combination of professional use of self and reflective alliance, that correlated with change in those 2 surveys that were directly about reflective consultation. So we were able to observe change that aligned with people feeling more self-efficacious in their participation and their perception of their reflective consultant, which makes a lot of sense that those surveys would align with this self-openness dimension because that's what they were about. So that is a really exciting step for us and hopefully will help us continue to do research with this tool now that we show that it can measure something that we are already measuring with surveys. So the second big takeaway was that there was change over time. And 6 months is not a very long time to participate in reflective consultation, especially when the first meeting, you're all complete strangers. And so this also was really encouraging to us. And so this graph shows a number of different measures. You can see the measures on the bottom. So self-openness was that measure from the RIOS that we talked about. So that was observed by coders, and we found a large difference between the self-openness displayed in the first session and the last session, showing that people were kind of coming together as a reflective group. And similarly with parallel process, people were much more likely to dive deeper into those interconnected relationships in the last session than the first session with a medium effect. And some of that is potentially just because the first session is a lot of introduction and the last session is a lot of kind of closure and tying things together. And so that was one limitation of this study, that we only coded those 2 time points, which might be fairly unique. But in what we could do in this study, that was really encouraging to be able to say that we have a tool that can show that change. And so those were the group measures, again, like I talked about. And then we also saw some change in individual self-report measures, those surveys. Overall, there was a medium-sized increase in self-efficacy, that people felt more confident at the end of the study than the beginning that they could fully participate. There was a large effect on that reflective supervision rating scale, which was about your perception of your reflective consultant. So again, it did seem to be that there was that trust developing, that ability to feel part of the group. And then we also saw a small effect in increased compassion satisfaction. So that was from that quality of life measure, and it was about the positive feelings people had about their jobs increased a little bit. And so that's really encouraging and really is kind of where we hope we're able to show that this reflective consultation has an impact. And so this was not where there was no control group. And again, this study is just kind of preliminary findings, but to be able to show within 6 months that there was a significant increase in positive feelings about one's work is really exciting from our end. Then our third finding was that participants generally found the experience valuable. So as I said, at post-test, we asked people to just share a little bit at what they felt about it. So we asked 3 questions. To what degree has your reflective supervision consultation been helpful in reducing feelings of being overwhelmed, helpless, or hopeless? And 76% of people answered that positively. So we had a 5-point scale. 1 and 2 were kind of, it wasn't helpful. 3 was neutral, and 4 and 5 were, yes, it was helpful to different degrees. So 76% of people answered a 4 or a 5 when asked about its positive impact on your feelings of effectiveness in your work with children and family. 66% of people answered a 4 or a 5. And then, has it been helpful to you in considering the perspectives of those you work with? 58% of people answered positively. And so the majority answered positively for all the questions. It seemed to have the strongest, people perceived it was most strongly helpful with reducing those negative feelings of burnout, and not quite as much as considering the perspectives. And we also saw that in that others' perspective dimension of the RIOS did not significantly increase over time. And so it may be that 6 months wasn't enough time to really go deeply into that piece, or it may just be that reflective consultation is more strongly going to affect those personal pieces. And so again, this research has generated so many more questions and opportunities, and we're really excited about how we can use this to generate more research to really understand the experience. But overall, again, it was really encouraging that even this kind of very brief online with strangers, people thought it was helpful. And I think that really shows a lot about the great need that child welfare workers have. For each of those 3 questions, we asked people to explain their answers. And looking through all the answers together, we found 3 main themes that a lot of different people brought up. The first was that reflective space is necessary in child welfare work because it's such a job filled with stress, emotions, and high pressure. And a lot of people felt that it was the nature of the work that really lent itself to this additional space that wasn't about problem solving or what next step should be taken, but that was that chance for a person to get to think about how their work was affecting themselves and why it mattered that they were the person in those relationships and what that meant. A second theme that we identified was that the peer support and outside perspectives were very helpful. So a lot of people said that one of the most beneficial parts of the study was getting to talk to people across agencies, across different states. And a lot of what they learned was that people all over are having a lot of the same issues. So in some ways, it was just very validating that it wasn't just me, it wasn't just our town, but also people were able to learn some new perspectives of what are you doing about this systematic challenge in your agency, and how might that be different, and what can we learn from each other. And then the third theme was that reflective consultation helped people feel acknowledged and valued. And I really liked the first quote. I think that if I did this regularly, I would feel more like a person and less like a social worker machine. And I think that's one of the really key pieces of reflective consultation, that when we acknowledge that humans helping humans is deeply emotional work, we also are forced to acknowledge that they therefore need the support, that people can't go on doing this work and doing it well if they aren't having their own support and their own ability to process what they're going through. So I think a lot of that really spoke to the need in the child welfare field for professional support of this type. Reading through those written answers was also useful for feedback for our own learning. A lot of people mentioned that they didn't feel like 6 months was enough to make a large impact, and we agree that 6 months is really probably too short. That was the resources that we had for this study, but it was really good to hear directly from people that they would have liked to have sessions continue over a longer period of time and or occur more frequently, so that 6 sessions probably is not going to have the maximum impact that it could have had in a longer situation. Another thing we learned was that scheduling was difficult, and we heard that from both the reflective consultants as well as the participants, and we were expecting that. Child welfare work is unpredictable. It has emergencies that need to be attended to, but it's definitely something, if we continue to do research or if people are implementing this reflective work in child welfare settings, something to really be aware of, that is not necessarily going to be simple, and you really have to make a way for people to prioritize this. Otherwise, they might not be able to participate to their full extent. And then finally, a few people didn't find the groups very helpful. Some people already felt that they had existing support in their workplace, and this didn't add a lot. And some people just made some comments about things that they didn't find helpful. And so that's always really good for us to learn about why and when and for who is this working and isn't this working. And so that's something we'll also be looking into as we continue our research on this topic. And then the last big takeaway was that we have a lot to learn about how reflective consultation is done. Again, this was kind of a small preliminary study, but one thing that we're just keeping aware of is the different ways that people do reflective consultation. And so currently it's done in different professions and different agencies, either individually or in groups. And our study was primarily made up of groups, but some people did have one-on-one consultation because their group members weren't available at that time, or we had some people drop out of the study and had some groups that just ended up being one-on-one. So we were able to look at this kind of incidentally, compare one-on-one to small groups of 2 or 3 people, and that we found no differences in the quality of reflection, so on the RIOS, in the observed scores, nor the perception, so people's survey answers, whether they participated by themselves or in a group. So we thought that was very interesting. Again, we know it's being done both ways, and so that's just a little hint that more research should be used. Is there a group size that works better than a different group size? So all kinds of things we can think about there. And then we also know that, like this study, reflective consultation is increasingly being done online to take away some of those geographic barriers. And we found that technology issues occurred during 63% of people's first sessions. And so that was a high rate. And we don't know a lot yet about how technology issues impede or don't impede that forming of trust, that forming of relationships, but it's something, again, we're kind of aware of. But it was also encouraging to see that by the last session, only 17% of those last sessions had technology issues. And so it seems very possible that there might just be a little time lag for online sessions, that it just takes a little bit of getting used to the technology and being comfortable with being in a group online, and things might smooth out as they go. So again, that's kind of an open question, but it was really exciting to just be able to get a little bit of data and just look at some of these things and be able to pinpoint what needs to be looked at next. In conclusion, this project was a crucial first step in establishing, one, that reflective consultation can be an important support for child welfare workers. It's being done more widely in other professions such as home visiting and clinical work, but not as frequently in child welfare work. So we thought it was really important to get that message out there. We were able to document that small online groups of strangers can form reflective relationships fairly quickly. It was really pretty incredible how much change we could see in just 6 months of time with these groups. And so again, that speaks to potentially the usefulness of reflective supervision. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, it was really helpful for us in providing evidence that this RIOS tool will be useful in further research. And we're also have some directions of using the RIOS as a practice tool as well. We have some online courses about the RIOS. People are using it just in their reflective supervision, both as participants and consultants. And so to be able to get some of this first data that it measured things that are important was really exciting. And so this study felt very preliminary, and it brought up a lot of new questions that we're really excited to explore next. In future studies, we will need to examine what happens in between the first and last sessions, because as I said, that's kind of a limited view. What happens in relationships that are longer than just 6 sessions, because that's not a whole lot of time. Talking about how those parameters, like the number of participants, whether or not they know each other previously, whether it's online or in person, affect the process, and then how to make it most helpful for the largest number of people. So when doesn't it work, or when doesn't it work well? Overall, what I really got from all of this coding, watching videos, reading people's answers, is just really that reiteration that child welfare workers are doing really important work and really putting themselves out there for the children and family, and thus they deserve holistic professional support. There's a huge need to really acknowledge the work that's being done and acknowledge that having sufficient support is really necessary to enable it to be done well. I want to say thanks again to all who supported this work: SEED, CASHU, the College for Education and Human Development here at the University of Minnesota, and to all who participated. My email was listed on the first slide of this PowerPoint. It's asm@umn.edu, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions about the research study findings, about how the RIOS is being used, or about more generally how to integrate reflective practice into your workplace. Thank you so much for the work that you do. It's very appreciated.